much. Here with us now is NBC News contributor Father Robert Barron. Father, can you put the Benedict papacy into context? What's his legacy? The papacy before him, Pope John Paul II, massive in terms of the history of the church. This one's a little different. What's the legacy in your mind?
Well, I think he sees his papacy very much in continuity with that of John Paul II. Both John Paul and Benedict were men of the council. They were at Vatican II. They contributed to its major teachings. And I think both saw their pontificates as an attempt to interpret Vatican II properly. So I would say that's the major contribution of Pope Benedict. He wanted to read Vatican II as an evangelical council, a council that wanted to get the message of the faith out to the wider world. So I think very much in continuity with John Paul, and it was the stress on the new evangelization. I'd say that's probably his major legacy.
So, Father, this will kick off sort of the ultimate insider political battle, if you will. I can think of nothing less transparent than the process for the election of a new pope. The participants, I guess it's a cardinal sin for any of the participants to discuss it. So they literally are told that they are, I guess, going to hell if they talk about what happens in that room. Wow. So, but I wonder if you could just take, for sort of the laymen and women out there, just take us through the process. What is going to unfold in the weeks and months ahead to elect a new pope?
Well, of course, this one's very unusual because we're not dealing with the death of a pope followed by a period of mourning and a number of ceremonies and masses that intervene. Now we have a pope telling us when he's going to resign, namely February 28th. So he resigns the 8 o'clock in the evening, Rome time, the 28th, at which point we have a sede vacante situation, which is Latin for the chair is vacant. It means the chair of Peter is vacant. At which point all the cardinals of the world gather, and they have a period of consultation. We're not quite sure how long that's going to be, but they will consult with one another, and they will discuss the future of the church. Then they will go into conclave, and the conclaves in recent years have not been typically all that long. Go back over history, some have been quite long. They tend to be a day, maybe a few days, but the conclave will take place, the new pope will be elected and then announced to the world. What's really interesting about this situation is that now we have a resigned or retired pope, and that, as you say, has not happened for an awfully long time. But the main process will be pretty much as you'd expect, except we don't have the intervening time of mourning.
So, Father, with all good, non-transparent political processes, let's go ahead and speculate on what the result will be. So the largest growth within the Catholic Church has been in the developing world, in South America. Actually, the top 3 countries now for the number of Catholics are Brazil, then Mexico, then the Philippines. Yet when you look at the composition of the conclave, it's 61 Europeans, a majority of the conclave. Is there any chance that we would see a pope who came from outside of Europe?
Sure. The last couple of pontificates, we've seen an increased internationalization of the College of Cardinals. As you say, there's still a kind of dominance to the European cardinals. Nevertheless, they're more and more from other parts of the world, especially the Third World. And so, sure, I think that's a possibility. Cardinal Turkson's mentioned sometimes, the head of the Pontifical Council for Peace and Justice. I think of Cardinal Maradiaga of Tegucigalpa in Honduras. He's mentioned sometimes. Last time around, Cardinal Arinze from Nigeria. Now, he's a little older now, but still you see his name mentioned. So, yeah, it's certainly a possibility. And there are a lot of people in the church who realize how much the church has changed and how it's growing very much in the Third World. That might be reflected in the papal election.
Well, yeah, and Father, I'm hearing that the insider pick is a sort of a safer bet. Angelo Scola, Cardinal of Milan, is bandied about. But I remember watching the Cardinal Consistory last fall. Yes, I watched it because I'm a dork. And the figure of Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines really loomed large. I know he's young, he's only 55, but he is really thought of as being sort of the future of the Vatican in so many ways, both for being an intellectual, a populist, wanting a more humble church. Do you think there's any possibility, as Crystal mentioned, the Philippines is a big sort of a constituency, do you think there's any possibility that we'll get someone like him?
Maybe. Again, it's hard to speculate.
Yeah.
It depends on how the cardinals organize themselves. And, think of someone like Karol Wojtyła back in 1978. Emerging from what was maybe a bit of a disagreement among the leading candidates, and then Wojtyła emerges.
Yeah.
So you never know. He was a huge surprise in 1978. sometimes the expected candidate emerges, many times the unexpected candidate emerges. We don't know. If I were putting money on it, I think I'd get behind Cardinal Marc Ouellette, who's the head of the Congregation for Bishops. And Marc Ouellette's a very impressive fellow. He had been the Archbishop of Quebec in Canada. He'd be the first Pope from the New World. And I was in Rome just about a month ago for a conference that he chaired. And I heard him go effortlessly from Italian to Spanish to French to Portuguese. So he has that John Paul II ease with languages. And a man that knows the church very widely. He'd been a seminary rector down in Colombia and from Canada, wide experience in Europe and at the Vatican. He'd be certainly a strong candidate.
Right. Father, what do you make of, that this is supposed to be sort of you're called by God to this throne, and you're generally supposed to sit there until you're gone, until your body gives out. And there's this very sort of personal reason for saying, I can do it no more. He watched his friend do it until he could no longer breathe. So what do you make of that personal part of the application?
Yeah, it's interesting. And as you said, it surprised pretty much everybody. I think even the Pope's inner circle was surprised by this move. And it's a very unusual move. As you say, it's not been for 700 years that we've seen this happen. I think in Pope Benedict's case, it's his great respect for the office. I think he knew that he was just physically too weak to carry out this punishingly difficult job, and it is that. And for someone at that advanced age, I think he just said, in honesty, I can't do this. Now, John Paul had kind of a different spirituality. His was to really carry it through to the bitter end. I think with Pope Benedict, it was more of a rational calculus that this was a job that was just proving too much for him. And I think he had such respect for the office, he felt it wasn't the ideal situation. But again, that's speculative too. We're just going on what he said in his statement, which was really just that he didn't feel strong enough to carry on. And, I think people should realize how very difficult that job is. And for someone who's 85 and increasingly infirm, it's an especially difficult job.
All right, Father Robert Barron, thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Thanks.